In the recent analysis of the Corruption Perception Index 2023, carried out by Transparency International, figures were released that raise concern at a global level. When evaluating the levels of corruption perceived in the public sector of 180 countries and territories, the results reveal a dark reality. More than 66% of these nations are located below the threshold of 50 on a scale where 0 represents a panorama marked by rampant corruption and 100 the total absence of such practices. This data shows that the fight against corruption continues to be a crucial challenge worldwide, reflected in a global average score of just 43. However, the most alarming thing about the report lies in the absence of encouraging signs in any region of the world regarding the eradication of this scourge. Instead of seeing significant improvements, many regions are experiencing stagnation and even deterioration in their efforts to combat this critical problem. Today, in Extraordinary Walks, we tell you everything about it. The 2023 Corruption Perceptions Index, released on January 30, 2024, highlights countries that have achieved remarkably low levels of corruption in the public sector. Topping the list are nations such as Denmark, Finland, and New Zealand, boasting enviable scores of 90, 87, and 85 respectively. They are closely followed by Norway, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, and Luxembourg, making up the top 10 positions in this prestigious classification. At the opposite end of the index are countries such as Somalia, Syria, South Sudan, and Venezuela, with significantly low scores of 11 and 13, placing them in the sad position of being the most affected by corruption. Adding to this sorry list are other nations such as Yemen, Nicaragua, North Korea, and Haiti, standing out for their equally discouraging scores on the Corruption Perception Index. According to the report's findings, countries facing armed conflict or under authoritarian regimes tend to score noticeably lower on the Corruption Perception Index. This link shows the close relationship between political stability and the prevalence of corrupt practices in the public sector. Among the countries with an intermediate score, there is Spain, which maintained its score at 60, aligning itself with the previous edition in 2022. However, its position in the world ranking experienced a slight decline as it fell from 35th to 36th place among the 180 countries evaluated. During the year in question, Spain lagged behind 35 other countries whose public management is perceived as more transparent. Among these, Uruguay stands out, located in 16th place with 73 points, and Chile in 29th position with 66 points. These Latin American nations surpassed Spain in the perception of corruption in the public sector according to this index. In the current global scenario, challenges of various kinds persist in different regions. Although there has been some progress in some countries, the lowest average remains entrenched in sub-Saharan Africa, where democracy and the rule of law face continued pressure. On the other hand, Eastern Europe and Central Asia struggle with dysfunctional rule of law, the rise of authoritarianism, and entrenched systemic corruption. In the Middle East and North Africa, improvements are limited, reflecting persistent struggles against political corruption and internal conflict. Globally, the rest of the world appears stagnant, with all other regions showing averages below 50 on the Corruption Perceptions Index. Although historically a leader in certain respects, the Asia-Pacific region is experiencing long-term stagnation, with some countries that were previously at the forefront now falling back. The situation in Somalia remains alarming in 2024, with all parties to the conflict violating international humanitarian law with impunity. Al-Shabaab has intensified its attacks on civilians, exacerbating the already serious humanitarian crisis caused by conflict and drought. More than 1.8 million people have been displaced, plunging the population into despair and suffering. In Syria, since its start in March 2011, the conflict has left a devastating trail of death, with hundreds of thousands of lives lost and more than 12 million people displaced from their homes, often repeatedly. The country's infrastructure is in a desolate state, with houses, hospitals, and schools reduced to rubble, and numerous neighborhoods without access to drinking water or adequate sanitation services. The rise in food prices has plunged the economy into a crisis, on the verge of collapse. In South Sudan, the civil war of more than 2 decades has left deep scars in the country. Persistent instability, coupled with enormous development needs, continues to affect citizens who face a devastating reality of destruction, displacement, violence, disease, hunger, and death. Millions of people live in extreme poverty, struggling to satisfy their basic needs and achieve a dignified life. In Venezuela, the Venezuelan exodus has reached unprecedented proportions, with almost 4.8 million people leaving their homes and moving mainly to Latin America and the Caribbean. This crisis of displaced people constitutes one of the greatest humanitarian challenges worldwide and the largest exodus in the recent history of the region. The majority of refugees, around 80%, have sought refuge in Latin American and Caribbean countries, facing few prospects of return in the short or medium term.